Appamada and its programs are supported by your generosity, and your generosity and support makes such a difference. You can find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org. Thank you.
Prepare for Dharma talk. I will be just thrilled if you can hear this. Sweet Joel has been working with me on coming up with stuff. Okay. Well, good morning. Welcome to all of you who have joined us today on this chilly Valentine's. I noticed that Paul and Connie were appropriately attired, and Lauren, maybe some others I haven't seen. And I want to welcome all of you who are listening to the recordings on our website. Considering what has been going on in America and probably in the rest of the world, I thought that a discussion on reality might be a good topic. With Buddhism, the biggest problem isn't sin, as with religious traditions, but ignorance, our fundamental misunderstanding of reality. The content of this Dharma talk comes from an article in Lion's Roar, cleverly entitled, "Reality Isn't What You Think," by Andy Carr. Do things really exist as we see them? Mountains, streams, oceans, cities seem solid and reliable. Past, present, and future seem like three separate, distinctive things. This way of thinking allows us to see I and mine. This is how it seems to almost everyone all the time. Yet, even with our limited view, we can see that things change. And when we explore deeper, we have to admit that things are always changing at every moment. And this is a good thing. If things didn't change the way we tend to feel they don't, we'd be stuck. We wouldn't be capable of breaking out of our reactive self. We would be incapable of experiencing liberation, the main promise of Buddhism. Seeing the world from a larger, continuous, non-permanent perspective gives us the vision to let go of the limited perspective of the pain of birth, sickness, old age, and death. If things existed the way we see them, then all our fears would be justified and our hopes worth struggling for. The cycle of birth, old age, sickness, and death would be the final truth. The Buddha would be wrong and ego would exist, and egolessness would be impossible. It would be Buddhism that was a delusion. There seems to be a contradiction between the reality we experience on a daily basis and the reality described by the Buddha. It comes from our viewing the world as from a very self-centered perspective, a very limited view. The contradiction between the reality we experience and the one the Buddha described exists because the way things appear to us is not the way things truly are. This is because there are two ways of seeing everything. One is a view that is limited by our personal perspective, that things are solid and separate. The other is an expansive view that looks outside ourselves. Where we see the world as solid, confining, and limited, Buddhas see the world as open, spacious, and relaxed. Investigating the difference between the way the world appears to us and the reality proclaimed by the Buddha is our key practice. Our seeing is obscured by basic ignorance and the delusion arising from that ignorance. Our contemplative practice invites us to question what we experience. It offers a good method for analyzing whether or not things are solid, separate, and lasting as we think they are. The common way things appear to our ignorant view is called apparent reality. It is not the way things really are. It is only the way things appear to us. Through practice, we come to a place where we can see past our basic ignorance of viewing the world as consisting of things that are solid and separate, to recognizing the fluid, interconnected world that is changing continually. We come to understand as our on silent illumination chant states, here there is not a single thing from the tiniest hair or speck of dust outside yourself. This study is a study of recognizing no self or emptiness. The most fruitful way of comprehending this second way of seeing things, the less obvious one of no self or emptiness, is through the expansive practice. Okay. I just lost my screen. Well, Nancy, I may not be able to share the screen.
Can you see the screen now? I already shared.
I can see yours. Oh, great. Okay, great. I lost my my text, so we're good. All right. The most fruitful way of comprehending this second way of seeing things, the less obvious one of no self and emptiness, is through the expansive practice of contemplation. This is a practice of listening to the teachings, contemplating their meaning, and meditation. Listening to the teachings is pretty straightforward. You're doing it right now. You're on the road to comprehending emptiness. The contemplation, to contemplate the meaning of teachings, is to begin by asking how the teaching relates to you and your experiences. The second way is to examine emptiness, is to look at the nature of the question or issue you're examining. Is it of real substance, or is it a projection of mind? A third way is to use logical analysis to clarify your understanding. You can ask yourself a series of questions such as, is this body one thing or many things? It must be one or the other to truly exist. Meditation transforms the intellectual understanding developed by contemplation into realization or embodiment. Today, we are going to focus on contemplation, contemplating how the teachings can be applied to our lived experience of reality. I'm going to start by giving two examples of how I was able to expand my view of reality, and then we'll break into small groups to experience expanding our own views of reality. The first morning I returned to the Zendo to facilitate morning Zazen after Peg had left to live in Chicago. I was filled with sadness. Of course, the house was dark and cold when I entered. I remembered what it was like entering when Peg was there. It was always light and warm, or cool when needed. Peg was almost always there with her delighted smile greeting me as I entered. It took me back to my childhood. My father was a deacon in our tiny fundamentalist Texas Panhandle church, where we often had weather like we are experiencing in Austin right now. Sunday was a different time for us. We were on a different schedule. Mother was rushing about trying to do the impossible, to be in two places at once. She had prepared breakfast and had cleaned up, and she was trying to orchestrate dinner, as we called it, uh, what baking while she was at church so that it would be ready when we were at home and had returned. And everyone was busy dressing in our Sunday best clothes. Each Sunday morning, Daddy would leave this special family time of us all with the same mission to go to the church building to set the thermostat to just the right temperature so that when the congregation arrived at the building would be just as inviting as Peg had made her house for us. Obviously, this was in the days before Nest thermostats that could be handled from afar, and the time of that many other things didn't exist. I always resented Daddy having to leave early and then return to go to church with us. Why did Daddy always have to do it? Why couldn't someone else do it? Why did our special time together have to be interrupted every Sunday? This was my reality, that my poor daddy had this chore he had to do Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. This was the story I had projected onto the screen of my lived experience. However, after having experienced all of Peg's generosity and love for all these years, I suddenly saw my father's departure every Sunday morning to set the thermometer at the church in a different light. What if Daddy hadn't seen it as a chore at all? What if he was filled with the generosity that filled Peg and that he did this as an act of love for all the people who were going to come to worship that day? It certainly made more sense. I never once heard him complain about having to do this duty. And he was a loving, caring man. This was a very meaningful realization for me. All these years I had carried this resentment, this protection for my father. It was just a tiny memory in my psyche, but still, it was there. This new perspective, this new reality freed me from a grudge I had been holding. I offer this as an example of how our fixed perspective and small view can keep us stuck. The second example occurred when I was so ill with cancer. If you heard my Way Seeking Mind talk, you will remember this story. Often, on the floor throughout my marriage, I would find used floss. I projected quite a story onto this occurrence, and just who did he think was going to pick this up? Or something like that, as I grudgingly picked it up. But then there came a time when I was so ill that my dear partner was doing absolutely everything. All he had done before, now all I had done, plus he was now caring for me. As I sat on the couch one evening, I happened to spy some used floss on the floor. I was absolutely delighted to see it. This was something I could do. This was a way I could contribute to our life together. I was still able to reach down, pick the floss up off the floor, and throw it away. It was the very same situation, floss on the floor. But I had gone from begrudging the act to absolutely delighting that I had the opportunity to do it. Nothing had changed but my sense of reality. I had stopped viewing life through my self-centered lens and had been able to take a bigger perspective, a perspective outside myself. I started recognizing the generosity around me, and I grew into it. Today, I would like you to identify, if you can, something in your life that is causing suffering. It might be a chore or a situation. Examine your feelings around your suffering. See if you can see it in a more expansive way. Would taking on the paramita of generosity help you feel the experience more expansively? We're going to break into groups of 3 for 25 minutes. Spend the first 5 minutes in silence, settling, and then looking for something in your life causing you suffering that you might experiment with and see if you could view it more expansively. Next, each person will have 5 minutes to discuss what came up for them and use the remaining time for group sharing about the experience. Well, hello. It looks like maybe everyone's back now. Oh, there's Becky. Maybe a few more are coming. I didn't get a chance to be in a breakout group because I was afraid I'd go mute again. So I'd love to hear some of the things that you experienced or how it went. Kim.
But after we all told our suffering, it just appeared to me, and I mentioned this, that our suffering was all made up, and that we have that choice. I didn't say this, but that we have this choice of, is that the story we're going to make up so that we can suffer? And then I have this tree. I have these 2 trees right outside my window that I've been watching this morning, and one of them has a little blossom or something at the end of every branch. They're both pecan trees, and the other one doesn't have any of these. And I've been kind of curious about what's going on there, but you know, and how the one feels. I was talking about judgment and how I feel like in many situations I'm being judged, and so I'm judging these trees. And
Yeah.
you know, more stories, and I'm sure they're really cool about all this. You know, well, I'm going to do that next week or whatever, the blossoming. But,
yeah, when it's time.
Yeah.
Oh, Maren, you're muted. Can you unmute Maren? Oh, you can't. Nancy, can you help her? There you go.
Yeah, no, I can, but I didn't, it's fine. No worries. Somebody else was talking. That's good.
Well, it's your turn now.
I was just commenting on what Kim was saying, that one of the trees is suffering because it blossomed and it's gonna be icy, and the other one is feeling really really good that that waited.
Interesting stories.
Yes.
Lori, can you unmute?
Well, I presume I can.
You
Yes.
can.
So in our group, we were talking about different experiences that where, well, it's kind of like in your situation where that change, what is it that brings about that change? I mean, it's such a remarkable thing when your perspective changes and it alters things completely. I mean, it's like day and night.
Yes.
It's like that, what is that? It's a hair's breadth between good and evil or something. And for myself, I can't say what has caused, I mean, I can say practice has affected me for sure. But what affected me in one particular moment that it changed everything? You know, I can't say what that was. What was it to me? It was not a particular thought about I'm going to do this. I feel certain that it wasn't that. But that's my sense. It's more like some other knowing, or I don't know. That's.
I might offer that it's awareness. It's our awareness practice that we get all this and we start expanding how we're thinking, and then one day, one moment.
Yeah, I kind of think so too. And it's like I say, it's a different knowing, or just a spontaneous almost knowing of the right. I hate to say right, but that the action that you're taking is something that's going to have an expansive effect. So anyway, I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, Joan.
Oh, good. I'm unmuted. Okay. Well, I was in a breakout room with Maria, who just described a simple but very remarkable process of meeting parts of herself that would get wounded in and Maria, I hope I'm not going to do something terrible to what you said. That would get wounded in what had become all too commonplace or meetings with other people in which they would say wounding things to her. There were members of her own family who would say things that were wounding to her. And so she, for a while, was able to, as she described, disengage enough to not make the moment worse by reacting in the moment, but that there was more work to be done, as she has found, and she found the resources to take time for herself, to bring just a moment of practice realization into it and say, here I am, I'm having these reactions. That part of me that is hurt deserves to be heard, deserves to be recognized as a real part of me, even to the extent that anything within us is real, but that to not try and push away and ignore feelings, and those could be anxiety. And she at the end, she was talking about how in her practice, she makes a real point of inviting the most anxious parts of herself to participate in the sitting with her. And I said, you know, that's so interesting. And I have a common thing that I often, while I'm sitting, have a image of a young part of me who has just been humiliated by my older brother. And I invite that part to come and sit in my body right now as an adult, and be literally held within me as an adult, and to feel the ease with which I'm breathing, you know, and the relaxation of my muscles, and so that it can let go of the painful tightness that it's experiencing, you know. And I've done this many times because that part renews over and over again. And but what Maria was pointing to was also the possibility that I could invite the most critical parts of me in, the angriest and most critical parts. and let them sit with this same sort of ease. It had never occurred to me to do that, you know? And anyway, I feel really grateful for that. So thank you, Maria, and thanks for listening to me.
Thank you, Joe. Maria, did you want to add anything after? Okay. Paul, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. I was in a breakout room with Susan, and we were, our discussion was around the current political discourse that, and we were talking about the us and them ideas, and then the far right and the dangers associated with this current political climate, the real true dangers, harm to people. And interestingly, it turned out that I have a neighbor who had a visitor, her nephew, and after the nephew had left, she told me, in the spirit of, just being a good neighbor, she told me that the visitor, her nephew, had been to Washington, D.C., and he participated in the riots at the Capitol. And of course, that very alarming. Trying to be a good neighbor, because she was a good neighbor, just to let me know about that. And so she told me a little bit more about him. The individual, her nephew she told me that he had a history of mental illness, and she told me that she was visiting with him, and he said that they talked, and he said he just wanted to have a life where somebody could care for him, and that he could care for them, and he could have a family. He wanted to have a relationship. And so when she said that, of course, before she said it, I'm thinking all this really bad stuff, the harm and the differences and the us and them idea. And then after she told me that, of course, it helped me to recognize that he's a human, and he has some of the basic needs, the basic ideas that we all have, just wanting to be respected and cared for. I still have difficulty with it because of my differences with that view. And I wish, and I know that your talk this morning involved a different perspective on things so that it can relieve somewhat the suffering that we have. And I'm not sure that I've come to see that different perspective in this situation. It did help a lot to recognize his humanity when she told me a little bit more about him. And so I tried to speak about that aspect of it versus the fear and the danger and the stuff that happened. So thanks, Susan, for having that conversation with us this morning. And that was what we talked about.
Thank you, Paul. And while it may seem in your mind that you're still stuck over here, what I heard was an opening up, and it's a beginning. And, that's what we're working on. It's very encouraging. Yeah.
I want to add something too. I think the practice edge for me is, if it's possible even, is distinguishing between harmful actions outside of myself. Like, oh, I can identify that thing I'm seeing and hearing and learning about is harmful. And detaching myself, or making sure that I don't suffer because of it. Like running the possibilities over in my mind, or the fear, or whatever. But like, I do believe harmful things are happening. And so, and I also am suffering to some degree because I believe these harmful things are happening. And so I don't want to talk myself out of believing that harmful things are happening. I think I need clarity about that and all of that. But that's that's the practice edge for me.
Well, and that's the life we live in. It isn't the way we want it to be. There will be harmful things. And our position is to be in the moment. When harmful things happen in front of us, we need to respond in a way that is healthful for all. And yet knowing that there are harmful things going on elsewhere, and that is life as it is. And we do what we can, and we let go of the outcome. As hard as that is.
Can I add something?
Please.
Yeah, it was more off the back of, I was speaking to Joel earlier, and it was kind of, the minute comes in, doesn't it? And we get cut off, we get zoomed off. Yeah, and it was just about the anxiety, the talking about the anxiety side of things, and how I've learned that the anxiety that I have has been knocking on my door all my life, saying practice, practice. Like I've always tried to push it away and get rid of it. And now it's kind of, because I've invited it in, and I sit with it, it helps me to realize when I'm feeling anxious, when I have certain tensions in my body, I know my thinking's off. I know that somehow I'm not thinking right. So I'll sit with the anxiety, and I'll sit with that part of me, and I'll look at where I'm going, what's going on here, where's my thinking off kilter, that's making me this scared or this anxious or this frightened. And it's really become a valuable part of my practice where I, when I start having those feelings, it's like it's an opportunity to sit and to really look at whether I'm looking through that glazed window and distorting everything, or whether I'm looking clearly. And it's the tensions, identifying the different tensions in my body, and then knowing that, right, there's something I'm not looking at clearly here that's disturbing my whole system. And I need to sit back and just sit and meditate for a while and just really look at that and be with that in a place of compassion towards that, while seeing where it is I'm not thinking quite right. And I found that really valuable in my practice. It's been knocking on my door all my life, and I've just been saying, go away, go away. And now I've said, come in, and we're making friends. We're learning about what this is about, and, where I'm going wrong with certain thinking, and, scaring myself to death over things that I don't necessarily have to take that stance or that perspective. And it's become a real source of nourishment and practice and information as well. So
what a teaching, Maria, that this thing that, all of your life you've been pushing back, and now you've made that turn and welcoming it in and learning from it, that it is valuable to you. That's just wonderful.
Yeah, I've spent a long time trying to get rid of it, and that didn't work.
Yeah, it didn't work, did it? Wasn't gonna let you.
Because I hadn't learned what it needed to teach me, and what it's still teaching me.
Can I just add one thing, Joan?
Please.
So, in our group towards the end, we were talking about this story that Joko Beck teaches in one of her talks with one of her students, where she said, okay, if you're in a rowboat and you're going, really nice and smoothly down the stream, and then this other boat jams into you, like, what do you feel? Like you're yelling at the person in the boat and blah, blah, blah. She said, well, what if there's nobody in the boat that hit you? How do you feel then? And the whole, that has been so meaningful for me. So, I think practice in general teaches us to challenge when we get very overwhelmed with emotion, and especially hurt. And that little story has just really helped me a lot. So I offer it. Like, there's usually nobody in the boat. There's reasons why we respond or tend to respond, but it's different. Thank you.
And Kathy, did I see your hand? You're muted, yeah.
You did. I have a short story. I said, as I'm getting older, I have more things to look at. And one of the things that happened recently, it was the relationship with a cousin who's 3 years older than I am. And she, for some reason, said, well, they loved you more than me, meaning my grandparents, or more than me and my brother, actually. And I was just so taken with that. And I stopped and I looked at her and said, oh, I wonder if that had to do with the fact that my mother during the war World War II, went back to live with her parents. And that's where I was born. And we stayed there for 2.5 years until my father joined us again. And she had no idea of that history. She was a kid also.
Yeah.
And nobody had any reason to tell her. And she was so amazed at that. And it changed our relationship. And the last time I talked with her, she said, I really miss seeing you. Yeah. Yeah, it was really dear. But that's that. I don't know if I would have caught that before. I think that it's learning that staying in the present.
Yeah, skillful means. Well, this has been so rich. Thank you all for sharing. And we will have service now. Before we do, I want to do a big thank you for Nancy. She has turned somersaults for this, for us all being able to have this today.
Yay, Nancy.
Prepare for service.